My name is Claire Mercer. I'm 28 years old, and on my birthday, my parents invited 30 relatives to what they called a family dinner at our lakeside inn, then used the dessert course to throw me out of my own bloodline. My mom stood up first, one hand still wrapped around her wine glass, and shoved her chair back so hard it scraped across the floor. Then she pointed toward the front door and said, loud enough for every aunt, cousin, and in-law to hear, "You're a parasite draining this family's money." I thought that was the worst thing she could say. Then my dad cut in without even blinking. "If you want to act grown," he said, "pay back every dollar we ever spent on you or get out right now." Nobody laughed. That would have been easier. The room just went dead, and all I could hear was silverware settling onto plates and the soft buzz of my little cousin's phone recording from the far end of the table. My brother wouldn't look at me. My mother kept her hand aimed at the door like I was something being removed from the property. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the collapse they were clearly hoping for. I picked up my coat, walked out past 30 stunned relatives, and drove away in complete silence while a plan started building itself in my head, piece by piece, like it had been waiting for permission. 1 week later, they were calling me in a panic. Dozens of calls a day. Before I tell you what happened after I walked out, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I really want to know how far this story travels. By the time I got back to my apartment in Albany that night, I had watched the whole dinner happen twice already. The first time was in real life. The second was through a shaky video my cousin sent me with the message, "I'm sorry, you should have this." In the clip, my mother's voice sounded even colder than it had in the room. My father sounded rehearsed. That was the part that bothered me most. It didn't feel like a blow-up. It felt like a performance they had been waiting to stage. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in the black dress I'd worn to my own birthday dinner, and finally let myself admit what I had spent years minimizing. They didn't just humiliate me. They built a family identity around me being the one who owed them, while quietly leaning on me every time their business got too complicated to survive on charm and denial. My family owns Mercer House, a renovated lakeside inn in the Hudson Valley that doubles as a wedding venue from spring through late fall. On social media, it looks like a postcard life. Twinkle lights over the dock, white chairs lined up by the water, happy couples kissing under maple trees, my mother smiling beside floral arches, my father shaking hands with contractors, my brother striding through the barn venue like he personally invented rustic luxury. In those photos, I'm either cropped out or carrying a laptop. That's basically the whole family dynamic in one sentence. I wasn't the face of the business. I was the unseen part that kept the pretty version legal, insured, licensed, and open. I work as a hospitality risk underwriter for a regional insurance group, which means I spend my weekdays reading venue contracts, spotting liability holes, checking occupancy limits, reviewing liquor coverage, and making sure businesses don't destroy themselves because nobody bothered to read the fine print. My parents used to joke that I had the exciting personality of a fire code manual. Metum. Funny thing is, that fire code manual personality is exactly what kept their inn alive. After a storm damaged the boathouse 3 years ago, I handled the insurance claim that covered the repairs. When the county changed assembly rules for event venues, I rewrote their occupancy documentation. When their booking platform almost froze payouts over missing tax verification, I fixed that too. When a preservation grant became available for historic properties, I spent 6 weekends building the application package, coordinating photos, receipts, permit histories, and structural assessments until Mercer House got approved for a 6-figure grant my father still liked to describe as a lucky break. It wasn't luck. It was me in sweatpants at 1 a.m, cross-referencing paperwork while everyone else slept, and still, in that dining room, My mother called me a parasite. Around midnight, I called Naomi, my oldest friend, the kind of friend who doesn't waste time pretending your family might secretly mean well. She listened while I replayed the dinner, then asked one simple question. Claire, what exactly do they think you take from them? That question sat in my chest like a nail. Because the truth was, I didn't take from them. I had been quietly feeding their business with my time, my expertise, my subscriptions, my professional judgment, and sometimes my own money whenever something urgent needed to clear before a wedding weekend. I opened the folder on my laptop where I kept backup copies of everything tied to Mercer House. Not because I was planning revenge, but because I'd learned years ago that if I didn't document what I did, it would magically become something Dean handled, or one of Carol's ideas, or Ethan's leadership. What I saw as I scrolled wasn't just work. It was proof. Proof that the family drain was the one plugging holes. Proof that every time they called me dramatic, difficult, or ungrateful, they still expected me to answer when a permit was due, an inspector emailed, a bartender called out, a vendor needed a COI, or a payout got stuck. I thought about the way my mother pointed at the door in front of everyone. I thought about my father demanding repayment like parenthood had been a loan agreement. And that was when the fog cleared. I didn't need to dig up some buried estate secret. I didn't need to hack anything, expose private journals, or destroy their reputation online. I only needed to stop doing what I had been doing for years. Stop carrying a business whose owners were comfortable calling me a parasite in public. Stop protecting people who had just announced with 30 witnesses that they no longer considered me family unless I stayed useful. So I made a new folder on my desktop and named it something plain enough to keep me calm. Return to owner. The next morning, I treated my family the way I treat unstable venues at work. I built an exposure report. Not an emotional rant, not a daughter's diary, but a clean, time-stamped breakdown of every system, subscription, credential, payment method, deadline, and point of contact tied to Mercer House, where my name, email, card, or professional access still sat in the background, keeping things from blowing up. The list got ugly fast. Event booking platform billing profile, my card. County assembly permit contact, my email. Fire inspection follow-up chain, me. Liquor liability renewal packet, me. Vendor insurance certificate tracking, my dashboard. Wedding floor plan approval edits, my software. State preservation grant reporting contact, me. Monthly cybersecurity subscription for their guest Wi-Fi and payment terminals, my account. Emergency maintenance dispatch login for the dock lighting and backup generators, mine too. I had not realized how deeply I'd been woven into their operations until I saw it all lined up in one document. It felt less like helping a family business and more like being hidden infrastructure. Around noon, my phone lit up with a text from my brother Ethan. Mom was upset last night. You know she didn't mean it like that. I stared at it for a full minute because there is no sentence in the English language that has excused more cruelty than didn't mean it like that. I asked him one thing. Which part? Parasite or get out? He didn't answer. A little later, my mother sent, You embarrassed us by storming out. That one actually made me laugh, alone in my kitchen, because there is something surreal about being publicly disowned and then blamed for leaving. I didn't argue. I screenshotted everything and kept building the file. By the afternoon, I had reached the part of the list that mattered most, deadlines. And that's when the real shape of the next week came into focus. A spring wedding with 200 guests was scheduled for the following Saturday. Before that event could legally happen, the county still needed an updated dock capacity diagram because the ceremony had been moved closer to the water. The alcohol rider for outdoor bar service also needed a designated compliance contact to sign off on revised staffing and service zones. Their booking processor required ownership verification on a reserve account because they had crossed a payout threshold after taking 3 large deposits in 1 month. None of those tasks were impossible. They were just the kind of boring, detail-heavy work my family always assumed would somehow get done because I existed. I opened a separate email thread and drafted the cleanest message I've ever sent in my life. Subject line: Transition of Mercer House operational accounts. In the body, I wrote that effective immediately, I was withdrawing from all unpaid operational support roles connected to Mercer House. I attached a document listing every active account, vendor, renewal date, compliance task, contact number, and required action. I noted, calmly and professionally, that any systems currently billed through my personal card would be removed in 7 calendar days. Any matters requiring my signature, email verification, or professional review would need to be reassigned. I did not insult them. I did not mention the dinner. I did not say, "This is what happens when you publicly disown the daughter who kept your venue open." I just returned responsibility to its owners. Before I hit send, I called Naomi and read it aloud. She listened to the whole thing and said, "That's not revenge. That's an exit report." Exactly. That was why I could live with it. I sent the email to my parents, Ethan, the venue manager, and the outside bookkeeper they barely listened to. 10 minutes later, Ethan called. I let it go to voicemail. "Claire, stop being dramatic," he said. "Nobody needs a whole manifesto because Mom had a bad night." A manifesto. That's what men call documentation when it makes them nervous. My father didn't call. He replied to the email with one line, "Do what you want." So I did. Over the next 2 days, I worked through my list without fanfare. I removed my card from the booking platform billing profile. I downloaded and archived the vendor's COI library, then sent the access handoff instructions. I forwarded the fire marshal correspondence with the note, "Inspection response still needed by Friday." I updated the state grant portal with a formal notice that I was no longer the administrative contact for Mercer House, and that future communications should go to ownership directly. I transferred the dock lighting maintenance account out of my dashboard. I exported the event floor plan templates and emailed them to the venue manager with the exact dimensions and filing notes she would need. Every step I took was reversible if they simply picked it up. That was the point. I wasn't setting a fire. I was stepping away from one that had been quietly burning under my feet for years. On the 6th day, my Aunt Denise called me. She had been at the birthday dinner, seated 3 chairs from my mother when it happened. "I saw your email because Carol forwarded it to me like she wanted me to tell her she was the victim," she said. I didn't. Then she asked the question nobody in my immediate family had bothered to ask. "Are you okay?" I told her the truth. "I think I am now." She went quiet, then said, "Your mother is telling people you barely help with anything, and you're trying to punish them because you're jealous of Ethan." There it was. Same family myth, new packaging. I thanked her, hung up, and added one final item to my file, current narrative being spread. The next morning, the 7th day, the calls started. The first call came at 7:12 a.m. from the venue manager, Kelsey, who almost never contacted me directly unless something was actively unraveling. I answered because I knew this one wouldn't be performance. "Claire," she said without preamble, "the booking platform froze this weekend's payout reserve because the billing profile changed and ownership verification is incomplete. Your mom says the system is glitching. Is it glitching?" I stood at my kitchen counter, coffee halfway to my mouth, and looked out at the parking lot while the answer settled between us. "No," I said. "It isn't glitching. My card came off like I said it would." There was a pause. Then, very quietly, "Oh." Kelsey was the first person all week to understand exactly what that meant. She didn't argue. She asked where the ownership verification form was supposed to go, and I told her it had been attached in the handoff document on page 4. 20 minutes later, my mother called. I let it ring. Then my father. Then Ethan. Then my mother again. Then the front desk line from Mercer House. By 8:30, I had 11 missed calls and 3 voicemails. In the first, my mother sounded annoyed. In the second, she sounded sharp. In the third, she sounded scared. "Claire, whatever game this is, stop it now," she said. "A wedding is in 3 days and the processor is holding funds." That sentence would have broken the old version of me. The old version would have opened her laptop, fixed everything, soothed everyone, then accepted a cold thank you or no thanks at all. The new version listened to the voicemail twice and noticed what wasn't there. No apology, no accountability, no acknowledgement of what they had done in front of 30 relatives. Just panic that the machine had stopped working when the invisible operator stepped away. By mid-morning, the panic spread. The county inspector's office emailed the venue manager asking for the revised dock capacity map and fire lane confirmation. The insurer followed up requesting the updated outdoor bar staffing plan and designated event compliance contact before the rider could be reissued. The preservation office sent a routine quarterly check-in to the old administrative chain, bounced back, then requested an ownership update. None of this was sabotage. It was just time. Deadlines have a way of exposing who was actually doing the work. Around lunchtime, Ethan finally reached me by calling from a number I didn't recognize. "What the hell are you doing?" was how he opened. Not hello. Not please. "Returning ownership," I said. He laughed once, tight and breathless. "You really think you run that place?" I leaned back in my chair and said the truest thing I'd said all week. "No, Ethan, that's the problem. I kept it running for people who thought that was the same thing." He started in on the familiar script. Family, overreaction, mom being emotional, dad under stress, me making things harder than they needed to be. I let him talk until he said, "Just log in and fix the reserve hold." Just. That word again. Like I was being difficult about tying my body back under a collapsing house. "Did you read the transfer file?" I asked. Silence. I already knew the answer. "Did you read page 4? Where the processor explains exactly what ownership documents need to be uploaded?" More silence. Then anger. Because shame and laziness nearly always arrive wearing the same coat. "You love this," he snapped. "You love making everybody come to you." I almost told him he had it backward. I hated it. I hated being the person everyone came to while pretending I barely mattered, but I didn't waste the breath. Instead, I said, "I'm not your operations department anymore," and hung up. By that evening, the family group chat, which had stayed quiet when I got humiliated at my own birthday, was suddenly alive. My mother sent, "Can somebody get Claire to stop this nonsense?" My father wrote, "She's trying to cripple the business over a private family disagreement." Private, 30 relatives, a room full of witnesses, a child being pushed toward the door. The family miracle of language never stops amazing me. Aunt Denise replied before I could. Nothing about that dinner was private. Uncle Martin followed with, "Didn't you tell her to get out?" Then Logan, one of my younger cousins, dropped the most devastating message in the thread. A still image from the birthday video, frozen on the exact moment my mother pointed at the door. After that, nobody typed for a while. At 9:47 p.m., my father called again, and this time I answered. His voice had changed. Less thunder, more strain. "Claire," he said, "we need to talk in person. This is getting out of hand." I almost asked whether he meant the wedding, the processor, the permit issues, or the fact that for the first time in years his authority wasn't enough to force labor out of me. Instead I said, You had 30 people for the first meeting. You can have them for the next one. Another silence. He knew exactly what I meant. Fine, he said at last. Come to Mercer House tomorrow night. We'll settle it with the family. When I hung up, Naomi looked at me from the other end of my couch and said, You know they think they're calling you back to control the story. I nodded. I know. Then I picked up my laptop and started printing. The next night, Mercer House looked exactly the way it always had when my family wanted the building itself to do half the persuading. Warm light in every window, candles at the entrance, soft music drifting from the parlor. If you didn't know better, you'd think love lived there. I parked, sat behind the wheel for a few extra seconds, and reminded myself why I had agreed to come back. Not for closure, not for reconciliation, for record correction. When I walked in, about 20 people were already there, some of the same relatives who watched me get publicly disowned a week earlier, plus a few who had only heard the cleaned-up version afterward. My mother stood near the fireplace in a cream sweater that probably photographed beautifully. My father had his reading glasses in one hand and his jaw set like he was preparing to moderate a board meeting. Ethan paced near the bar. Nobody greeted me first. That told me everything. I took a seat at the long table, set down my accordion file, and kept my coat on. My father opened with the kind of calm that only appears when a man is trying not to show that events have moved beyond his control. We're here, he said, because Claire has chosen to retaliate against this family and the business over a misunderstanding at dinner last week. A misunderstanding? There it was again, dressed up and ready for church. Before I could respond, my mother added, We've all said harsh things in emotional moments. But trying to jeopardize booked weddings and employees' livelihoods? That's vindictive. If I'd come there to defend my feelings, I would have lost. Feelings are too easy for families like mine to pathologize. So I didn't defend my feelings. I opened the file and passed the first packet down the table. These are the operational systems, deadlines, and accounts I managed for Mercer House as unpaid labor, I said. Each item includes dates, contact names, and attached handoff instructions I sent 7 days ago. Nobody reached for the pages at first. Then Aunt Denise did. Then Logan. Then Uncle Martin. Then, like a ripple, papers began moving around the room. My father tried to interrupt. That's not the point. It is exactly the point, I said. Because a parasite takes. So let's get specific about who was taking from whom. That was the moment the room changed, not exploded. Changed. My mother's face tightened. Ethan stopped pacing. My father sat down. I laid out the facts one at a time, the way I would in a professional review where nobody gets to hide behind volume. I showed the booking platform billing invoices paid from my card for 14 straight months. I showed the insurance correspondence where I had handled claims, renewals, rider revisions, and venue exposure recommendations. I showed the county emails listing me as the responsible follow-up contact for assembly compliance. I showed the grant approval packet I had built and the quarterly reporting reminders still tied to my email. I showed the emergency maintenance invoices I had authorized after the dock lights failed before a wedding weekend. Then I passed around a one-page summary of direct out-of-pocket expenses I had covered over the last 3 years when something just needed to clear quickly. The total wasn't millionaire money. That wasn't the point. The point was that it existed at all while my parents were telling relatives I drained the family. My mother reacted first, exactly as I expected. That's helping family, she said sharply. That's what people do for each other. I looked at her and said, Then why did you call me a parasite for it? Nobody moved. Not even Ethan. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried a different angle. Because you always act like your life is so hard. We gave you everything. No, I said. You gave me a role. Be useful. Be available. Be invisible while Ethan gets credit for outcomes you don't understand. Ethan slammed a hand against the chair beside him. That's ridiculous. So I slid the next document across to him. The preservation grant application, 48 pages. My name listed as lead preparer on every section. You told people at dinner the East Wing renovation happened because you pushed the business forward, I said. That renovation happened because I secured the grant money and assembled the compliance file that released it. For the first time all night, Ethan didn't have a comeback ready. He just stared at the page like it had insulted him personally. My father decided then to switch from denial to moral theater. Whatever Claire helped with, he said, that doesn't justify putting the business at risk. Families don't weaponize responsibilities. That line almost would have worked if anyone in the room had forgotten the birthday dinner. But Logan hadn't. He played the clip from his phone without warning, my mother pointing toward the door, my father saying, "Pay back every dollar or get out right now." The sound cut through the room like broken glass. My mother whispered, "Turn that off." Nobody did. Aunt Denise set her packet down and looked directly at my parents. You can't publicly throw your daughter away and then call it betrayal when she stops working for you, she said. Uncle Martin nodded. Especially not if she's been doing half the legal and operational work around here. My father's expression changed then, not to shame, to calculation. He looked at me and said, "What do you want?" That question told me more than any apology could have. He still thought this was a negotiation where I would name a price and step back into position. "I want accuracy," I said. "You told everyone I drained this family's money. Tonight you correct that lie. In front of the same people you said it to. And after that, Mercer House survives or doesn't on the labor of the people who own it." My mother stood up so fast her chair tipped. "You're enjoying this," she said, voice shaking. "You always wanted us to admit you mattered more than Ethan." It would have been easier if jealousy had been the reason. Jealousy is small enough for people to dismiss. "No," I said. "I wanted to matter at all without having to save you first." That landed harder than anything else I said all night, because it was finally not about the inn, the bookings, or the paperwork. It was about a daughter who had spent years translating competence into usefulness, because usefulness was the closest thing her family ever offered to love. The silence that followed wasn't gentle. It was the kind that forces people to decide which story they are willing to keep believing. Aunt Denise broke it. "Carol," she said quietly, "say it plainly. Did Claire drain this family's money?" My mother looked around the room and realized too late that performance only works when the audience is still yours. "No," she said at last, barely audible. "Louder," Logan muttered from the far end. My father glared at him, but the damage was done. My mother lifted her chin and said, with every ounce of bitterness still intact, "No, she did not drain the family's money." I nodded once. Then I stood, closed the file, and said, "Good. Then we're done here." We weren't done, of course. Families like mine never let truth be the final sound in the room if they can still drag out blame. My mother started crying the second she realized the correction hadn't magically restored her authority. My father pivoted to logistics, always a bad sign, because it meant he had moved past defending his pride and into triage. "The Holden wedding is in 2 days," he said. "The county still needs the doc update, the insurer needs the bar rider, and the processor is holding deposits. If you care about anyone in this family or any employee here, you'll help us get through this weekend." There it was, guilt dressed as practicality. Ethan jumped back in now that the emotional tide had shifted slightly away from him. "Just tell us what to do," he said, but even that came out wrong, not because the words were harsh, but because of the assumption underneath them. He still wanted me in the role, even if temporarily. Explain, fix, absorb, exit quietly. I could feel 30 versions of my old self trying to rise at once. The one who would stay late, the one who would smooth it over for Kelsey and the waitstaff and the bartenders. The one who would tell herself she was helping employees, not parents. The one who would call that generosity instead of compulsion. For a few dangerous seconds, I almost gave in. Then Naomi's voice came back to me from the night before. If you step in now, they'll learn nothing except that humiliation is survivable as long as they wait you out.